Hi everyone! In this video I'm going to show you a few different ways to make selections with tools in Photoshop. I have this picture here of some macaroons, and what I want to do is separate them from the plate underneath it. Let's start off with one of the first tools that we could use. Over in your tool panel is where your selection tools live. If I click and hold, a little box will pop out that has a few options. We're going to start with the quick selection tool. Now this tool here, if we click, hold and drag, it will make a selection based on what Photoshop can see with the pixels. By default, it will be on this little plus sign, so that means it's adding a selection. We know what's selected because it has these marching ants around the selection. If we click, hold and drag and make more, we can see that sometimes the computer's not really sure on what it's selecting, so it just makes a guess. So this little part here, we don't really want that selected because we know that that's part of the plate. So to zoom in, press Command plus. To minus out sections like that, you go over to the minus sign up here. Or you can press Option on your keyboard, and then we can just minus it out. If your brush is too large or too small, you can adjust the size up in here. Mine's on 6 point at the moment, but we can have it whatever we like. Swap back over to the plus sign, and let's just go and continue to make a selection of these macaroons. Another tip to make your brush size smaller is using the square brackets on the keyboard. Alright, now that we have our selection, we can right click with our mouse and there's a few options here. We can select inverse, and what that will do is choose the plate on the outside. We can see that because we have the marching ants on the perimeter of the image. Let's just select inverse again, so we just have our macaroons selected. You can save your selection. Now this is very useful if you've spent a lot of time making a selection which you might need to use again. And you can give it a name, macaroons, and say OK. So then what happens if we accidentally click deselect, and rather than going and doing it all again, we can go up to select and then say load selection, and we've got our macaroons channel here that we can say OK, and there's our selection again. You can right click and say layer via copy, and what it will do is put these on their own layer. If we undo that, we can do right click layer via cut, which if we turn our layers on and off, we can see that on our background layer, the macaroons have been cut out and then added onto their own separate layer here. Just undo that. You can right click and free transform these, which will give you the option to change them, move them around, but it's always best to do these on a layer via copy so that you have your original and you're not doing anything destructive with your image. So that's a little bit of quick selection. Let's have a look at another tool that we can use. So click and hold, and let's choose the magic wand tool. Now the magic wand tool, if we just click, what it will do is choose pixels that are similar. If we wanted to select more than one set of pixels at a time, hold down the Shift key and see it's making extra selections. But if we zoom in, we can see that for this particular image, it's probably not the best tool to use because it's not grabbing all of the information that we want, and we could be here forever until we have our selection made. We'll just deselect that. By default, the tolerance here is on 32. If we reduce it down to say 8, let's see what it picks up. It picks up a smaller amount of pixels at a time. That's because it has a lower tolerance. If we put the tolerance up to 70, let's have a look. It picks up a lot more, but it could choose areas that we don't want as well. So keep that in mind if you're going to use the magic wand tool. Sometimes it works instantly on an image. It really just depends what the image is and where there are clear defined lines. We'll bring that back down to 32, the default. And if I right click, there's a few different options. Similar to the quick selection, we've got our deselect, our select inverse, our save selection, layer via copy, and layer via cut. Photoshop has introduced a new tool called Select Subject, and that lives up here when we have one of the selection tools selected. So if I click this one, Photoshop's going to do its best to work out what the subject is and what we want to have selected. It's done a really good job on this image. If we zoom in, we can see that it's pretty accurate. There's a few little spots that maybe aren't. You can refine this by going to your quick selection tool, and just like before, you might want to plus or minus out parts of the selection. To refine a selection even further, we can have a bit selected, like now, and go up to select and mask. In this tool, we can change different ways that we can see our selection. So you can really choose any out of these ones, and you can dance between a few of them. You can change the opacity of it as well. The helpful thing to use in this is the Refine Edge brush. And what that will do, if we zoom in, Command plus, we can go in with our Refine Edge brush tool. Maybe I'll make mine a little bit smaller. And we can just go in and refine those edges. It's just like painting over the top. We might not have to do it too much on this one because our edges are quite defined already. This tool here is like a brush tool. You can go in and brush back in information that you know is there. And you can move the opacity down so that we can see where the areas haven't been selected. It's like painting it back in. If you hold down Option on your keyboard, that will minus out the part that you have selected. When you're happy with your selection, there's a couple of options you can choose. Down in Output here, Output to Selection, that will just have our marching ants around our selection like before, where we can then right-click, copy, or cut, or we can just say create a new layer, and if I press OK, it will make the selection on a new layer. Let's have a look at what some other things can do. We can click and then choose New Layer with Layer Mask, say OK, and what it will do is it will have our original image but then make it a mask of it so we can edit it later on. You can do that with the eraser tool, for example. Let's have a look at that now. If I go over to the eraser tool, and if I have my default here, white as the foreground, black as the background, you can click this tool here if that's not what you see. And we can go in, making sure that our layer mask here is selected, paint away the parts that we don't want. If we make a mistake, we can swap this little arrow around and then bring it back because we are using that layer mask. This part here, that's the important part for this tool. Your goal when making selections is to try and get it as accurate and clean and clear as possible. If you have obvious chunks missing out of your selection, that's not going to look very good. Let's have a look at some other tools that are available to us. Above the quick selection tool, we have Lasso, Polygon Lasso, and Magnetic Lasso. Let's choose the Magnetic Lasso and see what it does. It kind of sticks to the edges. This is another way that we can make selections. Just click, hold, and drag, and it makes anchor points to the edges of these pixels. I've made a mistake there, but we'll come back and fix it up. The trick with this one is to go right back to where you started and see how there's a little circle at the edge there. That means it will complete the selection. Now we can go back in with our quick selection tool and then just edit these parts that it hasn't quite grabbed. So that's the magnetic lasso tool. Let's have a look at the polygon lasso tool. This here will, like the name suggests, create different polygons. So if I just click in different areas, it will create straight lines. And then if I go back to the start point, we've got that little circle, which means it will close it up. And then we can right click and do whatever we need to it. Sometimes this will work on particular images. It just depends. So we'll deselect that. And let's have a look at the lasso tool. So this one's more of a free form. We can draw whatever we like. It's not very accurate, but there we have a selection. You can also use these marquee tools, all the different types of shapes. Click, hold and drag, make a circle, then you can right click, layer via copy, layer via cut. All of these options are available to you. Alright, let's try and see how we can use the select and mask tool on this image, which has a bit more going on in the background, which could make it tricky for our selection. Let's go over to the selection tool and let's try subject select. Alright, it's done a pretty good job. It's selected most of the dog here. We can go and use the quick selection tool and our little plus sign and then grab in this tail. And now let's choose select and mask. This is where the refine edge brush tool will come in handy, because we can go in and paint around to show the areas that we want to select. Maybe you need to zoom in. It's missing a bit of his foot here, so we would use our brush tool over here to bring his paw back into the image. Alright, let's change the view mode and see how it looks. Cool, we can see that his fur around the outside has been selected. It's not looking too bad. You can choose decontaminate colors here, and that will create an even further refined option. And by default, it will put the new layer to a layer mask, which is fine. So let's say OK. Great. If I create a new layer and put it behind, I can use the paint bucket tool to fill a color behind, which will show us our dog and all of his fur included. So that's a little bit on how to use the select tools in Photoshop to make refined selections from your image. Thanks for watching.